Welcome to 28.5, where we explore a unique and authentic perspective on the women's game, break down upcoming matchups, and discuss the latest news and trends in women's basketball. We are your hosts. I'm Sydney Story, and I played at the University of Tennessee under Pat Summitt.
And I'm Becca Goodman, and I played at the University of Notre Dame under Muffet McGraw. And we're thrilled to have you join us today. Before we jump in, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoy what you hear, be sure to tune in each week and support and share the love. Now let's get started with today's episode.
How's it going, Becca?
Good, Sid. Just rolling through this holiday season. How are you?
It feels like a weird stretch, but we are really headed into some conference play here, and it's going to really start rolling. So it was kind of like a lull, but now it's picking right back up. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Good. As same thing as you mentioned, these games have been interesting to watch just to see how teams are adapting and growing their game. But it's about to go up another level once conference play, like the heart of it gets rolling. So I think we're in for a great start to 2025.
We really are. And we're going to talk about some early Big Ten matchups that have been played. And really, you could tell across all these games that there was a bit of a slow start. You could tell that the teams had been off for 9 or 10 days. A lot of players got to go home over the holidays, and then they come back to reality. And when you were flowing in the first part of the season, then you take that time off, and now you're right back into playing again. You've got some almost like first game jitters going on a little bit, and I think we saw that across some of these games. So I think it's going to be interesting to see who handled that break really well and who came back swinging and ready to go in conference play. So today we've got 4 quarters for you. 3 of those quarters are going to be all around the Big Ten and some matchups, early matchups within that Big Ten conference play. And then that fourth quarter we're just going to highlight some upcoming matchups that are worth watching. So with that, you want to get us kicked off with our first quarter, Becca?
Yeah, absolutely. So first quarter, we got Nebraska playing the number 1 UCLA. We've chatted about Nebraska quite a bit. We mentioned that this game would be a big bar chart for them to kind of see where they're at, how they rank. They were ranked towards the end of the top 25. They have fallen out of the top 25 as of recently. But as you mentioned, girls went home. UCLA was one of those teams that hadn't played for 9 days. Lauren Betts was officially back after missing a couple games. So this was a game that was absolutely super slow to get rolling here. And I don't credit, but I don't credit like amazing defense. It was just everybody was out of whack, right? It just, offense wasn't really clicking, shots weren't really falling, turnover. It was definitely coming back from the holidays, trying to tweak, fine tune things. It was a great game for UCLA to have. They didn't play a top 10 opponent or anything like that, but for Nebraska, they held strong with them the first half. Halftime score was 30-37, right? So nothing terrible about that, but I also just think UCLA's play, they just weren't playing UCLA basketball. I will also mention foul trouble was across the board, especially for Nebraska. 6 of their players had 3 or more fouls, specifically Alexis Markowski, who's that big body post player who was their go-to against Georgia Tech a week or two before. So having her on the bench, not really being able to wrangle in Betts. They had another post player that came in and competed, but I just think Lauren was also trying to get her feet under her and get comfortable. So halftime was close, but the third quarter was all UCLA. They outscored Nebraska 31-13. Nebraska only had 4 field goals. Definitely a tough quarter. We talk about this a lot. You can't have a bad quarter in this game. When we used to have halves, it was every 4 minutes, right? We would talk about how did we do at the media timeout from the last one. We'd kind of dissect that. We're up 4, down 2, What do we need to do? These games are so quarter based that you can check in at the media halfway through, right? But to have a whole 10-minute quarter, it's really tough to bounce back. And I don't even know if I've said the final score yet, but UCLA won 91-54. But the game felt so much closer than the actual score, which is, you're probably thinking, how is that even possible? But the way they played the first half, it was just night and day. Again, just going back to Alexis Markowski, she's averaging a double-double or almost a double-double for Nebraska. She was held to 3 points, 2 rebounds, A lot of that due to foul trouble. Nebraska had a freshman come in off the bench, Hargrove. She chipped in 12 points, and Hake had 9. Those were their 2 leading scorers. Two individuals I haven't really heard get a lot of press or news lately. So props to them for coming in a tough environment and giving their team some love and energy that they desperately needed. Kiki Rice rolling as usual, 18 points. She was perfect from the floor, 8 for 8, and then hit some free throws. Lauren Betts bounced back, 21 points, 8 boards. And then Gardiner off the bench had 15 points. She's a transfer from Oregon State. Last little piece is just highlighting these huge buckets of stats that are important in more ways than I think we know. UCLA out rebounded Nebraska 48-18. UCLA had 5 blocks. Nebraska had 0. Points in the paint, UCLA had 46. Nebraska had 22. Interesting factor here is turnovers. UCLA actually led this one. They had 26 and Nebraska had 19. But again, when it came down to just making points in the paint, easy buckets, fast break points, I mean, they couldn't keep up with them. So all in all, Nebraska held with them in the first half, but I honestly just think it was UCLA was a little discombobulated bouncing back. What do you think?
Yeah, I think now that we're in Big Ten play here, it's so exciting. You've got the 2 teams that are coming into the Big Ten that are new in UCLA and USC, and they're ranked at the top of the conference. UCLA, is ranked number 1 in the country, right? Mm-hmm. So it's really interesting to see how some of these blue blood Big Ten schools handle UCLA and USC. And I just think it makes the Big Ten that much stronger this year, having those 2 teams come into the mix and some of the traditional Big Ten schools who have gotten better. We talk about the Big Ten all the time and how strong it is this year. And I'm like so excited for it. And the fact that Nebraska was able to hang with them in the first half. Yeah, we talked about it's the jitters coming back from break. And I think UCLA really had some of that. But they were able to hang with them. This is the number 1 team in the country. If they can figure out, like you said, they struggled that third quarter, but if they can figure out how to play a full 4 quarters, 40-minute game, I think Nebraska is capable of an upset or 2 in the Big Ten this year. It's just tough to knock off that number 1 team on the road.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. I mean, by no means was it going to be easy. And that's how these games that pop up, right? UCLA hasn't played in 9 days. They had time off for the holidays. That's how upsets happen when you're not really focused in, you're not paying attention. Maybe you're assuming it's going to be a cakewalk. But I completely agree with you. I think Nebraska will get better. They'll learn from it. And to hold the number 1 team in the country to within 6 or 7 points in the first half, I think that shows a lot of promise for them. And it should have a lot of confidence, especially when most of them were fouled out. Like, you barely even played your best players. Dang.
Maybe they'll meet again when it's the conference tourney. You never know.
Yeah, absolutely.
So good segue into our second quarter. We talked about UCLA and USC being ranked 1 and 2 in the Big Ten. Well, the 3rd and 4th ranked team in the Big Ten right now, we've got Maryland and we've got Michigan State. So they squared off. Number 8 Maryland played number 16 Michigan State. And this one was a fun one because both teams had really successfully won all, if not all, of the games heading into this one. Maryland comes in 11-0. Michigan State comes in 11-1. They had lost to Alabama right before the break. But if you look at both of these teams, they were absolutely rolling heading into this one. So an interesting matchup based on that body of work that they'd already have done. But also to me, and I talk about Maryland all the time with Brenda Fries, the Big Ten to me does not give her enough credit with how much experience and the national championship she's won and the Final Four she's been a part of, the experience that she brings. And we'll talk about it in a second here. You could see some of that in the second half in the way she coaches, the way she controls the game with her timeouts. On the other side, you've got Michigan State. So you've got Robin Freilich, who's in her second season at Michigan State, really trying to get Michigan State back on the map. Mm-hmm. If you remember back when we were in high school, Joanne P. McCauley was the head coach at Michigan State, took Michigan State to a national championship. They beat Tennessee in the Final Four to ultimately lose in that national championship, but she took them all the way, right? That was the only real time that I can remember that I know of that Michigan State was that relevant to the women's game. No knocking Susie Merchant. I thought she had a great career at Michigan State, really good coach. So it's interesting to see what Robin's trying to do with this Michigan State team. And she's really putting them on the map by those first few games here this season. And this conference play for her is going to be huge. And obviously for her team, right? She's got Dean Lockwood as an assistant. Dean was an assistant coach at Tennessee when I was there under Pat for years. So there is some experience, big time experience on the bench. Don't get me wrong, but just interesting to look at the two benches there that are squaring off and have already had a successful season heading into this. But I want to call out Maryland on the road, a tough team to beat. They're number 8 in the country. They are so deep. They average 29 points off the bench, which is
That's
insane.
nuts. That has to be one of the highest, honestly. 29 bench points. That's insane for women's college basketball. How many players are coming in and they're producing? That's amazing.
It really is. And it speaks to the depth of Maryland. I'm going to be curious to see how they do here in Big Ten play. But with that, they've got 2 star players. They've got Smeichel and Sellers. Smeichel averages 17.7 points per game. Sellers averages 11.8 points and 5.5 assists. And they really get things going for Maryland. On the Michigan State side, you've got Julia Ayrolt and Grace Van Sluten. Julia averages 16.6. Van Sluten averages 14.4 points per game. Both average over 7 rebounds a game. So it was kind of one of those matchups also. 2 players squaring off against 2 players, but then the bench that was able to fill in around them. Maryland was one of those teams that got off to one of those slow starts. You could tell the break got to them a little bit. Michigan State scores the first 5 points. Maryland has 3 turnovers to start the game. Turnovers have been something we've talked about with Maryland from the very beginning of the season. If they can control their turnovers for a full 40 minutes, they look like a completely different team. So they get off to a little bit of a rocky start, but then in the second quarter, they really got rolling. They got up as much as 17 points in the game. And at one point I was thinking, ooh, this thing might be over because they just had all the momentum, deep run. We talk about that a lot in the game, especially lately. Maryland really went on a deep run there, but Michigan State never went away. They chipped away a little bit towards the end of the second quarter. Halftime comes around and they start that third quarter. They're in their full court press that they run the entire game. And you can tell whatever was said at halftime by Freilich, she got her team going. They came out in the third quarter and absolutely put them back in the game. So it was super fun to watch that, especially because the pace of the game picked up a little bit with what they were able to do out of their full court press. Pretty impressed with their full court press. If they can continue to cause teams to have turnovers like that, I think we're seeing some good teams who are throwing that full court press out there, and you're seeing some teams struggle with it. Like we talked about Iowa struggling against that full court press on a couple teams now, right? Michigan State being one of them, Tennessee being another. So there are certain teams that you have to prepare for, be able to control the ball. Going into this one, Brenda Frese knew that Michigan State presses the whole game. It's not like she's not preparing her team, but you've got to go out there and execute. And Maryland came out in that third quarter, turned the ball over. They had 6 quick turnovers in the third quarter. And I'm thinking to myself, they look like a completely different team, right? So it's how do you put together that full 40 minutes? Because if Maryland can put together that full 40 minutes that they're capable of, like you saw in the second quarter, I talk about all the time, they're a Final Four caliber team if they can do that. I still think they're going to continue to develop. Big Ten is going to prepare them, and they potentially could make a run here in the tournament play because they have that depth. They have all those transfer players where Maryland maybe wasn't on the scene last year. They're on the scene now because they have the talent to do it. So it's an interesting thing to think about with Maryland in general. Back to the game, though, Michigan State did cut it to 2 in the fourth quarter there down the stretch. But Maryland, and I talked about it at the beginning here, Brenda Frese, Michigan State would go on a quick little run and you'd see her call a timeout. Right? She really tried to control the depth of the Michigan State runs. And that's what I didn't see in the first half with Freilich. Right? She didn't have an answer. She'd call a timeout after a run, but then Maryland would continue to strengthen their run. But when Brenda would call that timeout, you can kind of see things flip a little bit, if not slow down. So I just thought it was interesting to look at the 2 different coaches there and how they're coaching and really trying to counter each other. And I thought that Brenda did a great job with her time in possession and the timeouts she used to really weather that third quarter punch that Michigan State tried to come out with. And ultimately, I thought that her athletes stepped up. They got the job done, and Maryland ultimately wins this one. Score of 72-66. So it's a pretty close game, considering Michigan State got down by 17 in the first half and had to crawl back. They got it within 2. but just not enough on the road there against Maryland. And really two good teams here. I'm
Yeah,
excited to see what they can do.
absolutely. Maryland is also being so well coached. It's like the coaching staff and obviously Coach Freeze, they know what they need when, right? The timeout is the coach's action, but then there's what are you talking about in the timeout? What are you drawing up? And it always felt like when they came out of a timeout, they knew exactly what they were supposed to do and they executed. And not saying it was perfect around the board, but like they were able to change the tide, right? They were able to just make a bucket, get a stop. And I just think that's huge for a coach to know her players that well, to whenever you're drawing up at a timeout to try to make it happen, Brenda Freeze is definitely able to do it.
Yeah, and you and I saw that with the coaches that we played for.
Yes. Yep.
With Pat, with Muffet. I remember leaving timeouts and thinking to myself, yeah, that's exactly what we need to do. It almost, she made it seem like a no brainer, but it was things that you just bought into right away. And you're like, yeah, we got it. We got this.
Yep.
Yeah.
Isn't it hilarious how when it was like, say it was, you were in 32 on makes, 5 on misses, and then you call a timeout and they're like, all right, flip it to 23 on makes and 32 on misses. And then if there's a jump ball, we're going to run this. Like there was just so many things added and changed that you had to almost just like keep a running tally of in your mind of what we're currently in. Make sure you stick and stay in it. And everybody's also screaming the same thing on the court. So you're all in tune. It's like a dance. It really, truly is.
The IQ level that you get to with some of these good coaches. And I talk about Brenda Freeze a lot because you could tell her players are learning the game under her, which is awesome to see. And it was a good game. I'm like I said, excited to see what both those teams do throughout the conference play here.
Absolutely. All right, let's jump into our third quarter. I'm going to call it the hype for the game of the podcast, but then it was shortly shot down because we didn't have all players ready to go. So we're going to highlight Michigan versus USC. Michigan's ranked 23, USC's coming in at 4. And this game had so much hype around it just because I think Silas Swords, that freshman, can really show up in big games. We saw what she did opening game against South Carolina, what she's continued to do. Huge bummer that she's out with a leg injury. Obviously, hope she gets better. Was really looking forward to seeing her and just how she would react to USC's pressure and then also lack thereof pressure, right? So the pressure in the sense of they're not coming at you defensively. I just feel like they have some players on USC that can really bring it, but then there's 2 or 3 that kind of, right? Like the 2 guard, the 3 guard, you kind of are like, man, where you at? But super bummed to have her out. She is their leading rebounder, which is also interesting, I think. So they're missing their leading rebounder against USC, a powerhouse offensive board team. And just another few things that I want to preface. I'm sure we've highlighted this when we first talked about Michigan, but 6 players transferred out from Michigan before this year. They only had 4 returning players. So it's really great to see their success, the pieces they put together, and even not having Sila on the game, it was a decent game, right? Another thing I want to add is USC's assistant coach, Chris Coclanes, he was hired by the Dallas Wings, the WNBA team. So literally that day was his last shoot around and he hit a half court shot to send him off. So he wasn't at the game. He actually had to like leave right after that. But how cool was that? Like we talk about WNBA teams picking college women's basketball coaches, and just to kind of have that transition all the way through full circle from a player to coach to, coaching the WNBA, I think is really cool.
I think that's awesome. And so cool for those players that were just playing for him at the college level. They're going to wrap up season at the end of March, maybe early April for USC. We'll see. And then they get to watch their old coach coaching the Dallas Wings. I mean, that's amazing. Probably Paige Becker is going to go there.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Enrique's there. I mean, it's a good team for him to take over. That's awesome.
Absolutely. So back to the game. This was a lot like our Nebraska UCLA game. And I don't think it was anything. I just think these two teams were trying to feel each other out. There was a lot of turnovers. There was a lot of, USC plays fast-paced game. And I think Michigan tried, but it wasn't. They needed to really slow the ball down, try to get some IQ shots. I will say foul trouble here is another theme. Kiki Irfin was out most of the game. She ended up only playing half of it. With Sila being out as a leading rebounder, that really hurt them on the boards. Olsen, who was their leading scorer, had a rough first half. She ended up not scoring and having no rebounds, so she was 0 for 5. So definitely out of character. USC's bigger, more athletic. They just bring a different. And you're at USC, so it's a show, right? Cheryl Miller's there. There's celebs there. It's a whole production, and I love them for it. It's just it's a distraction, and if you're not ready to like attack it head on and get through it, it can be overwhelming for sure. And I'm not saying that was what happened to her. It's just I couldn't imagine playing there myself. I'd be looking in the stands. But I will say Jordan Hobbs for Michigan really kept them in the game. She had 14 points at halftime, 50% from three, 4 for 8. And the girl took 3 charges. Like Kiki got in basically in foul trouble because she took charges. Hobbs took charges on her left and right. So USC was up 10. Kiki got her third in the second quarter and then had to sit. First of all, Sid, how many fouls? I know we've talked about this. How many fouls were you allowed before you sat until after halftime?
Oh, 2 and you are out.
Exactly. So I think Coach Gottlieb to have the confidence in her was great, but it was also the pace of this game. And athletic as USC plays, they love to get up and block shots. It's just changing that mindset when you have to. If you're able to stay in, it's like walking a tightrope. It's really tough, right? You have to change a lot about your game and then be smart because you don't know how the refs are going to call it. Juju had a great first half, 15 points. Kiki had, even not barely playing, had 6 points, 5 boards. Marshall, who I talked a lot about in the last game, Kiki's kind of been in and out, whether it's they're not utilizing her as I think she should, right? She's a dominant force inside and she can take people off the drive. Whenever she's out or in foul trouble or not really in the swing and the flow of the offense, Marshall tends to step in. And she had 6 points at halftime, which absolutely kept USC in the game because the halftime score was 31-34 USC. Another thing to add just about that first half is both teams going to halftime. Michigan has 12 turnovers and USC has 11 at halftime. Like that's just, I think that just shows it was like sloppy basketball all around. At this point, it's try to get consistent buckets and stops no matter how you get them. But I will say going into the third quarter is where Olsen really starts to come alive for Michigan. It was great to see she started the third quarter with a strong take to the basket, got her first points, came down, hit a jumper, and actually put Michigan up 2 minutes into the third quarter. So as much as, we assume or think that USC will kind of take control, Michigan was there and had it and was competing for a while. At the end of the third, it was, USC tends to get a lead. They're up 10 now. I do want to highlight Juju is on pace to be USC's scoring leader through 46 games. She has 1,217 points at that point in time. Cheryl Miller, who currently holds it, had 978. So Juju's a plus 239.
That's insane.
To get the record, Miller currently has is 3,018. I don't doubt that Juju will not get it. And I think Cheryl Miller will graciously be there to support and hand it over because I think it's just time. And that's the type of person Cheryl Miller is. She's sidelined at every single USC game.
That's so cool. Legend. Absolute legend.
Yeah. So then in other news, not other news, in the third quarter, Kiki gets her fourth foul and has to sit. So again, Juju and Marshall really just carried the bulk of the load there. They had 21 of their team's 23 points in the third. At this point, Juju has 27, right? She's rolling, and that's where she gets dangerous. And if you're Michigan, you're trying to, whatever lead you had and advantage you had, and Kiki being out, you have to capitalize on that somehow. So fourth quarter rolls. Kiki's back, y'all. She hits a layup. She gets an offensive board and put back. Juju gets a back-to-back pull-up put her over 30 for the game. They went on a 24-3 scoring run over 8 minutes in the fourth. So we talk about, again, a bad quarter. And a bad quarter like that leads to USC winning by 20 points.
I'm looking at stat line here. Kiki played 21 minutes at the foul trouble you had talked about. So she plays half the game, essentially. She still has 9 rebounds and 18 points.
Isn't that insane?
She's insane.
Imagine her the whole game. That'd be really scary.
Yeah. And this is against Michigan, the number 20 team in the country. No slouch. She's coming out and just showing up. And Juju dropping 31. Like, it's just a typical game out there. Like, it's no big deal. It's just both those two together. We talk about some of these duos out there.
Yeah.
This duo is for real.
One more thing I wanted to add. Juju is second in career most 30-point games. She has 17 right now. Guess who has 16? She just passed. Your player of like women's basketball. That shocked me.
Plum.
Deladon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Delaware. Yeah.
And then guess who was
okay.
before Elena Deladon? Kelsey Mitchell.
Okay.
So you got Kelsey Mitchell, Elena Deladon, Juju, and of course you have Caitlin Clark is number one with 23 30-point games. Pretty nuts. Good company she's in for sure.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, back to one of those previous episodes we did, I had called out Deladon as like the best player I'd ever been on the court with. Like, she was just phenomenal. Yeah, that's cool. Juju getting it done.
Always, it seems, right? She's jujuing.
She's jujuing. I like that a lot. We should make a t-shirt with that or something.
I know.
Okay, so let's jump into the fourth quarter. We quickly wanted to highlight a few upcoming matchups that are worth watching. So this Sunday, January 5th, Notre Dame, who's ranked third in the country, has a conference game, ACC conference versus UNC. So North Carolina, who's ranked 17th, should be a pretty good matchup. I'm taking ND pretty handedly on that one, but we'll see how it goes. Tennessee, ranked 15th. They play Oklahoma, who's ranked 9th. This, to me, is a really telling matchup because Tennessee, yes, they played Florida State. They played Iowa. They've played some good teams, but they've played a much easier schedule than Tennessee typically has played historically heading into SEC play. And you've got Oklahoma, who's now in the SEC, playing really good basketball. This is a tough matchup for both of these teams. I think this is going to be a good game. Who are you picking on that one, Becca?
It's going to be, I haven't seen a lot of Tennessee games as much as you have, but I'm gonna go with Tennessee just because I think the speed of the game is gonna make Oklahoma uncomfortable. Oklahoma has, they have Reagan Beers, a lot of inside play, slow it down, look to work it into her. And I just think if Tennessee gets hot with those 3-point shots that we know they love to take and drain, that accompanied with running and gunning 5 in, 5 out, I'm rolling with Tennessee.
Yeah, I didn't even ask you about the Notre Dame game because I figured that you had the
Thank
Irish,
you.
just like I have the Vols.
Yep.
And then Maryland, number 8, plays Iowa 23, also on Sunday, January 5th. Those 3 games we just highlighted are going to be, it's stacking up for an amazing Sunday there. Who are you picking, Iowa versus Maryland?
I'm going with Maryland. I just think they're a more seasoned team than Iowa is right now. I think Iowa's still trying to get a bit of consistency and understand what their style of play that makes them successful consistently is. What about you?
I agree. I think Iowa's the biggest wild card to me in the conference right now because they have the caliber of players that can win games day in and day out. If Lucy Olson shows out like Lucy Olson's capable of showing out, if Hannah Stolke shows up and does her thing, O'Grady, you've got all these players that are capable of it. I'm going to go with Maryland also. Maryland needs to fix some of their turnover craziness too. So if Maryland comes out and they're sloppy with the basketball and some of those Iowa players bring what they're capable of, Iowa could very well win this one, but I'm also going to go with Maryland. And then Wednesday, January 8th, we have a couple good matchups. Ohio State, the Buckeyes, ranked 10th, are playing Michigan, the Wolverines, ranked 24th. So that should be a good one there. Who you taking? Buckeyes versus Wolverines. That's a big rivalry.
I'm just going to roll with Ohio State purely based on the rank. It's not fun. I don't have any fun stats. I think this will be a very telling game of how Michigan plays against kind of like a mid-tier top 10, right? Like Ohio State hasn't played anybody huge yet, right? Nobody in the top 5. So I think it's going to be a very telling game for both of these teams, for one another, how they play, where they're going to go, how their season's going to be. I just think this is an exciting one to watch, how they compete and how they respond.
Yeah, I might call the upset on this one.
Do it.
I'm going to go Michigan. If Sila Swords is back, I think they can really do it. And that's that's kind of the wild card. I don't know if she's going to be back by the 8th. That is going to be telling.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Cody McMahon over for Ohio State. Ohio State throws that full court pressure the entire game. Michigan's played a tougher schedule. You mentioned that Ohio State didn't really play a super tough non-conference schedule. Michigan opens the season against South Carolina, right? They didn't shy away from some of that competition. And I think Michigan gets up for this game and tries to pull off this upset. I'm going Wolverines over Buckeyes. Ooh, that's a tough one.
I'm also just going to say McMahon is a beast.
She is.
Man, I remember their last March Madness game. It was like her putting Ohio State on their back at like inside throwing up these moves but was like getting and ones because she's so strong and just finishes at the you know what? I'm excited to watch it for sure. McMahon is awesome.
Yeah, Heather Mason, shout out to Heather Mason. She's the strength coach, the head strength coach over at Ohio State, who was our strength coach at Tennessee. So she's going to hate me for picking the Wolverines there, but we'll see what happens. And then the last game on Wednesday, January 8th, worth watching is number 4 USC versus number 8 Maryland. Maryland, tough stretch
for sure.
In Big Ten play.
I'm rolling with USC. Kiki, please stay out of foul trouble. Unleash your inner beast that you do within just a half a game. Just do it the whole dang time and come out strong. I think USC has a bit of an upper hand here.
I'm also going to go USC. I think Maryland is going to peak March Madness timeframe, but they're gonna take some punches here in Big Ten play, and I think this game is going to be one of those games that they're going to turn around and learn from. So I'm going to go USC beating Maryland on Wednesday the 8th.
And that wraps up our fourth quarter. Thanks for a great episode today, Sid. In our first quarter, we talked about how UCLA handled business against Nebraska. Second quarter, we had Maryland get the W against Michigan State. Third quarter, USC showed up consistently through all 4 quarters against Michigan. And then in our fourth, we just highlighted some upcoming matchups that are absolutely worth watching. Thanks for tuning in today. We really appreciate it. Thanks, Sid. Thanks for hanging out. Always good to talk ball with you.
Always good to talk ball. Thanks everyone for listening. Download, subscribe, follow us on all of our socials. Reach out with any questions or comments that you've got for us. We're always looking forward to hearing back from you. And we will talk to you soon. Thanks everyone. Thanks, Beck.
See ya. That's the 28.5 final buzzer for today's episode. Don't forget to hit follow on your preferred podcast platforms to catch every play-by-play. New episodes drop each week throughout the season.
If you've enjoyed our courtside chat, drop us a review or follow us on our social media accounts. And remember, from females who have played the game, the size of the ball matters.